Hey there, Rick Sage, recording at the Rimrock Studios in Bishop, California. Welcome to Season 2 of the Outdoor Biz Podcast, where I speak with retailers, brand managers, athletes, executives, and others in the outdoor biz and share their stories, tips, advice, productivity tricks, and ideas you can use to take your career or business to the next level. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. I've used Audible for many years now. I'm on the road a lot, and Audible allows me to enjoy the great books I discover or are recommended by friends. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/theoutdoorbizpodcast. There are over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Start your 30-day free trial with Audible today. This episode is with Bruce Ward from Choose Outdoors. Bruce is involved in a number of great organizations and tells us about his work with the recreation industry, the timber industry, National Trails Day, and a unique program involving Rotary clubs. We also talk about how the national Christmas tree gets chosen and transported to D.C. Good morning, Bruce. Good to have you on the show. How's it going?
Good morning, Rick. It's great. We just got a bunch of snow here in Denver, and we've all been looking forward to that. So getting the skis tuned and getting ready to head out to the mountains here soon.
Nice. Awesome. And we're all getting ready to head there for the first outdoor retailer snow show in Denver. That's exciting.
It really is. You know, I've been going to the outdoor retailer show since it was in Vegas.
Yeah, me too.
And so for it to end up in Denver, it's nice, but we all certainly have our favorite spots in Salt Lake City. And, you know, I would encourage anyone that wanted to reach out to me at any point to know about some of the hot spots in Denver.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's good feedback. I may pick your brain for some restaurants. Yeah. Let's start with how you got exposed to the outdoors. What was your first outdoor adventure or camping trip or whatever it was?
Yeah, like a lot of us, I think in the outdoor industry, it started for me with Boy Scouts, and that was my introduction. I lived in suburban Boston and didn't have access to a lot of real wilderness, especially at that age. But I did, find a real affinity to some of those local open spaces and parks that sort of are part of the suburban part of Denver. Suburban part of Boston, and then. Where it really kicked in for me was after college, I got a job for a company called Trek International doing camping tours of North America and Europe and North Africa. And I did that for 7 years. So I spent 7 years pretty much on the road, living, with people from all over the world, mostly in their young 20s and early 30s. And we did everything from 2-week tours to 10-week tours.
Man, that must have been fun.
It was a great gig. I really enjoyed it from a very young age. I wanted to see the world, but it's like, how do you do that if you're not, extremely wealthy?
Yeah.
And this would be like a 9-month gig that I would be a tour guide, and then I would save up enough money to go travel internationally, mostly in third world countries for 3 months. And then I'd come back broke and do it all over again.
Nice.
So I did it for 7 years. And so I have this perspective. Obviously, in this country, we stayed in national forests, national parks, state parks, and, KOAs, and had that total spectrum of outdoor recreation experiences. But we did rafting and biking and, all of the outdoor activities you could imagine. And that's really sort of where I developed not only a passion for being outdoors, but also a passion for helping people to understand the significance and how fortunate we are to have the public lands that we have in this country.
Yeah, that's a great experience. And so after that, you've sort of transitioned into a liaison between some of the public agencies and government agencies. Did that come about at an early age, or how'd you get into all that stuff?
No. So what happened was when I decided that I had, kind of done my international travel scene, I came back to Boston and was really trying to determine where do I go from here. And my father, who was living alone, invited me to, land at his place for a while. And coincidentally, a mile down the road from his house, REI opened its first East Coast store in Reading, Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And so I went down, applied for a job, and did the whole, working on the floor, selling camping equipment, and then moved into the outreach role. And REI allowed me at that time to develop adventure travel program. So we called it New England Adventures. I used all the staff from that store, and we did everything from, biking to canoeing to winter camping trips. And then REI began to send me around the country to help when they were opening new stores in New Mexico, in Maryland, and different places to, one, kind of give them the background that I had, but also begin to integrate them with the local nonprofit organizations.
Oh, great.
And the land management agencies. So doing service projects was an early part of my job description. I was actually, in Boston, I was probably doing 8 or 9 of them a year. And, they kind of pulled me aside and said, Bruce, you only need to do one of these. And it just became such a great interaction. It was great for the store, obviously, because we were bringing a lot of people in. It was giving me opportunities to work with the land management agencies and understand, to some degree, where that interface between public and private and how volunteerism, especially now, is an important part of how we are able to be stewards of those public lands that have less and less resources associated with them and more demands on the agencies.
You must have built a huge contact list too. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so what that led to was I was approached by the American Hiking Society in Washington, D.C., and they asked me to serve on their board, and I did. And I actually had moved to Colorado, had spoke to Dennis Madsen, who was then the CEO of REI, and we started talking about the importance of trails and advocacy for trails. And I had approached him with Colorado Trails Day and then National Trails Day, and REI actually loaned me to the American Hiking Society. Basically said, you don't have to do your regular job, just go out there and make these, events work. And obviously that's taken off, significantly since we started that
How many
a long
years
time
has that
ago.
been going now? How many years ago was that? That's
about 25 years.
awesome.
Because
Congratulations. That's great.
Yeah, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the National Trail System Act and the National Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and I can talk to you a little bit more about how I'm involved with that. So yeah, it's been great to see this whole thing come together on so many different levels.
Yeah.
And so from there, we had developed a pretty robust sponsorship package for National Trails Day, and that allowed the American Hiking Society to hire me as their first paid president. And I moved to Washington, D.C., and kind of started to do the, networking with the senior management within, especially the Forest Service, but also the Park Service and BLM.
Right.
Spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill talking to members of Congress about the importance of recreation, specifically focused on non-motorized hiking.
So you've been communicating our message to those guys for over 20 years. That's terrific.
Yeah, and I was actually at the first, I don't know if you remember, but when the predecessor to the OIA, the Outdoor Recreation Coalition of America, was formed.
Orca, I remember that.
Yeah, Orca. I was one of the many ambassadors, and most of us, were very kind of looked somewhat humorously at being called ambassadors, because most of us were, have a dirtbag nature.
Right.
But we all went to Washington under Dave Secunda's leadership, who was the executive director at that time. And, it was well-intentioned, but when I look at how far the Outdoor Industry Association has come in terms of sophistication and in terms of their ability to really put across the message that is not just conservation, but is also business, and how important that has been to being able to reach across the aisle. And I think that was always a tough thing for the outdoor recreation community, because it was, pretty narrowly focused on the conservation side, but bringing in the number of jobs and the impact on the economy has given us the ability to, be more successful with both the Republicans and the Democrats.
Yeah, right. I got a couple more questions about that, but first, since it's so close to, past Christmas, but you got involved with the Capitol Christmas Tree Project too. How'd that come about?
Yeah, I've actually been doing it. Choose Outdoors has been chosen to assist the Forest Service in this for the last 7 years. I've just started on next year's Christmas tree, which will come from the Willamette National Forest in Oregon.
Wow.
And I've already got the following year in New Mexico lined up as well. So
wow.
The short story on it is, for 50 years, the Speaker of the House in Washington has asked the Chief of the Forest Service to bring him a Christmas tree. And the Forest Service has been doing it for that period of time, but only in more recent years has there been this interest in creating, we call them whistle stops as we go cross country, and increasingly utilizing the significant amount of media support that we get for this to underscore the importance of our national forests, the importance of recreation on our forests, and public lands in general. This year, the theme is Find Your Trail, because we're actually going to follow the Oregon Trail from, its beginning back to like Kansas City, and then make our way to DC. So yeah, we'll tie that whole in because it's, as I said, the 50th anniversary of the Trails Act. It's also the 175th anniversary of the Oregon Trail. So we've got some interesting synergies there.
That's great.
But the way it began for me was I was working with the forest supervisor on the White River National Forest, which is Vail and Aspen and Copper Mountain, that area, on the mountain pine beetle epidemic. So I had been engaged to help increase public awareness and private sector involvement in dealing with this 50 million acre devastation of our forests. How did that happen? Why did it happen? And what are we going to do about it? Kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And we were very successful on many different levels in conveying that message. And that forest was chosen to bring the Capitol Christmas tree to D.C. while I was working with them. And so the forest supervisor asked me, Bruce, is this something that you and Choose Outdoors would be interested in? And, we both kind of laugh about it. I felt like I had been handed the Olympics. This to me.
Right. The torch.
Yeah, exactly. This is about as good as it gets for my interest. And, Choose Outdoors' mission is connecting all Americans to our public lands through recreation. And we were originally formed because, I had seen so much of this. Hikers don't like mountain bikers, don't like horseback riders, motorized don't like non-motorized. And so when you look at the other stakeholders of our public lands, how well coordinated they were in their messaging and their priorities, where the messaging and the priorities in DC were so factionalized that it didn't make sense to anybody, So a congressman is going to help a hiking club and the mountain biking club is going to be pissed off at, or vice versa. Yeah. So I was looking for initiatives that had a universal appeal to them. And so to me, the Capitol Christmas tree served that purpose. The other great thing about working on the Capitol Christmas tree is, like so many of us in the recreation conservation world, we had a very limited pool of support. So, there was always the REIs, the North Faces, the Eagle Creek that would provide some level of support, but it was never a tremendous amount of money.
We didn't have those big corporate connections, right?
Exactly. So now, moving with the Capitol Christmas tree, I'm able to tell corporate sponsors that, you're not only getting, Santa Claus, but you're getting Smokey the Bear and Woodsy the Owl. Like, what more do you want in terms of, So I'm working with the trucking industry. I'm working with Alaska Airlines. I'm working with, travel and tourism outfits. I've got a whole sort of different realm of capability in terms of turning, this passion into a much more mainstream message that has so much more capacity to reach, people outside of let's face it, our tribe is pretty small in the greater scheme of things.
It is.
How do we break out of that and get into a world that, perhaps for many reasons has not always been that, friendly with the people in our community. Right. So acting as a bit of an ambassador.
Yeah. So speaking of people that may not have been that friendly, you must do a lot of work with the timber industry. They have to be involved in this, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so when I was working on this mountain pine beetle epidemic, I was sitting in these collaborative efforts in different parts of the Rocky Mountains, sitting down with, the environmental community, the recreation community, members of Congress, their staffers, and then also government agency people. But I was also sitting in that room with loggers, everybody from the guy driving a logging truck to the people that own the the trees. And it became very clear to me that we need to work together to create healthier forests. And the big issues that we're faced with right now are these catastrophic wildfires that have this, unprecedented fire behavior that's sterilizing the soil and causing these massive, mudslides that we're seeing in California and other parts of the country. But we're also seeing these massive insect infestations. And, the long and short of it is our forests need to be actively managed. We came in here the turn of the century and pretty much clear cut, to build the country, whether it was railroad ties or telephone poles or houses. So the forest that we're seeing now is not a historically natural forest.
Right.
We're looking at the results of what has happened during that period of time. And then on top of that, we have 100 years of fire suppression, and fire is a natural part of the ecology of these, natural areas.
Yeah. And
so now, one of the sound bites I use is the lodgepole pine in the Rocky Mountain West, which is the predominant species. A healthy stand is about 80 trees per acre.
Wow.
Well, because of what we've done, we're looking at over 1,000 trees per acre. So those are not healthy stands. They need to be actively managed in order to basically create to some degree, mimic what was here prior to all of this, clear cutting and the devastation that occurred during that period in our country's history.
Right.
And I also found that, that many of the national environmental organizations, the Nature Conservancy, the Conservation Fund, the recreation organizations like the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, National Wild Turkey Federation, have all agreed that for all of their interests and stakeholders and constituents, they need to get involved and become proactive in dealing with this issue. So it's an evolving perspective, and I think most of us who grew up with the spotted owl wars and the timber wars and the, concerns over cutting of old growth, there's a changing perspective on the conservation recreation side. But I think also if you talk to a lot of the people I talk to in the timber industry, they'll tell you they feel like they've learned from the recreation and conservation community about those concerns, and they've learned to work together very successfully in collaborative efforts all across the country.
Yeah, it seems like we've made a little bit of progress. We could do so much more, though. I mean, I remember when I first started going to college, I took an environmental biology course, and we talked about these issues. And even though progress has been made, there's still so much to do. Is that a function of just people being busy with day to day, or is it just shifting politics and initiatives? What do you think is causing us to not make progress faster, if you will?
I think that's an all of the above kind of response to that. But I also think that, the overarching response I get, especially when I tell them I'm working with the timber industry, and usually I'll get kind of a sideways, you're kidding me, you sold out or whatever.
Right.
So there's still that element there. But I think also, because we're seeing these catastrophic wildfires, because we're seeing these massive insect infestations, most people are scratching their heads saying, what's going on? Yeah. Obviously climate change is an element of this. There's no doubt about that. But not only what's going on, but what can be done about it. Yeah. And I think that there's the term I hear quite often is social license. And the social license really refers to gaining recognition that working across these, previous adversaries is something that we need to look more closely at.
Yeah.
And there's always this concern, are we going to go back to these times where there was, these clear cuts and this massive devastation of these natural areas? And, I firmly believe that because of the controls that are in place now, but also just based on public perceptions, you can't sell wood to Home Depot unless you have been able to demonstrate a certain amount of sustainable forestry as a part of where that wood came from.
Right.
And then for me, the other thing that I find to be, somewhat either short-sighted, hypocritical, depending on how you want to look at it, But the bottom line is, if we're preventing the cutting of wood here, and to some degree some of the other natural resource extraction that goes on in the country, we're going to get it from somewhere.
Yeah.
And the likely place we're going to get it from is a place that does not have environmental controls.
Yeah.
And when you start thinking about the carbon footprint of moving whatever these massive amounts of resources that we need as a country, right. From other places, it seems to be short-sighted to try to shut everything down without acknowledging, we're all riding mountain bikes. That steel came from somewhere. That carbon fiber came from somewhere.
Yeah, there's only one globe. We're all on the same globe. There's only one.
Exactly right. So just trying to get people to be more thoughtful about what that means, and that to transition is the other major initiative that Choose Outdoors does, which is that PBS series America's Forest with Chuck LaBelle, and that's really what that series is about. We did our first episode in Oregon, and it's basically like 60 minutes, kind of 3 8-minute segments for 30 minutes is what we do. And the Chuck LaBelle is a keyboardist for the Rolling Stones, the Allman Brothers, Eric Clapton, John Mayer, but he's also a tree farmer in Georgia who's become very prominent. He's written books on the subject and has really embraced sort of this spokesperson role. Mm-hmm. And so he's the host. And in Oregon, we did a segment on these 15-story buildings they're now using cross-laminated timber. So no steel, no concrete. And they're proving to be very successful in part because of the sustainability messaging that goes with utilization of wood versus some of these other, steel and concrete and what it takes to make that.
Well, we'll definitely link to that in the show notes. I haven't seen that series, but I will begin watching that. So you've been going to D.C. for over 25 years. I was speaking with Travis Campbell the other day and talking about the OIA and some of our messages and things we need to get better at. Do you have any tips for outdoor advocates and some of our OIA folks that go there? Travis says we're really good at protesting and really good at, stamping our feet and talking about what we want. We're not so good at politics. Do you have any advice on how these folks can improve their politics so that maybe our messages get heard more and listened to clearly and acted on more readily?
Well, I would say that from all of my perceptions of what the outdoor industry and the Outdoor Alliance do, I think they're very successful in many ways, way more successful than we ever were in the early days.
We've come a long way. Yes, we've come a long way. Yeah.
But, just a few things that I've taken heart because I've been doing this for so long. Oftentimes the first time you go to Washington, and depending on your connections, and depending on what your message is and who you're meeting with, oftentimes you're going to get a low-level staffer, maybe even an intern.
Right.
And what I've come to understand very early on is you should treat them just as you would meeting with that member, because in some cases they will go right back because they're excited about something or they're really interested in something and they'll feed that. But also importantly, many of those young people who I met 30 years ago are now members of Congress.
Right.
I was working with Cory Gardner, who's a senator from Colorado, when he was a staffer for Wayne Allard. And
interesting.
Nobody liked Wayne Allard. He was a Republican. He didn't really buy into our issues, but he actually helped me get funding for the Continental Divide Trail because we spoke about not necessarily economic impacts, but what we said was, look, we've got the private sector supporting this. We've got volunteers supporting this. We've got local legislators and government agencies supporting this.
Right.
So you've got a great sort of well-rounded constituency that sees the value in what we're doing. And that a lot of what happens in Washington comes from relationships. I feel
completely. Yeah.
I'm not patting myself on the back, but I've had a number of successes back there, not because I was bringing money to the table, but because I could bring sort of this ecumenical view of the utilization of our public lands. I didn't go in there, slamming the timber industry or slamming oil and gas because I needed those people. I mean, the Continental Divide Trail we spent 15 years working on went through, if you were to look through the topography, a lot of that was oil and gas, a lot of it was mining, a lot of it was grazing. And if I had gone in with guns blazing against all of those other stakeholders, I would have got nowhere.
Yeah.
I would have been, disenfranchised. But on the converse of that was by working with them, I got a lot more done with members of Congress than I ever would have if I had taken sort of a polarizing view, which I think unfortunately has been, the way that people thought you get things done. And depending on which way that, majority is in Congress, you may be great one year, but the next year nobody wants to talk to you.
Yeah, so, we're definitely seeing that. Yeah. Well, and I think too that these things, you look at over the history of our nation, a lot of these issues take a long time. And I think we have to, frequently step back and look at the bigger picture because, you're not going to win the vote or win the day in a week. It's going to take sometimes decades. And these are some of those things.
No, you're exactly right. And I mean, there was legislation that I worked on back there. I thought it was a no-brainer. Everybody's going to love it across the board. And you would be down to the wire and it wouldn't happen. Well, guess what? 15 years later, it gets slipped into an omnibus bill and you get it done.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But you do go through that whole period of feeling like you're just banging your head against a wall or just, how can people not understand how this is good for everyone?
Right.
And then ultimately, because you've developed that relationship, because you've had that perseverance, because you've, been able to demonstrate the many benefits to the country for what it is I think a lot of these legislators go back there with truly the best intentions. They're here because they love our country and they want to do things that are better, and then they get caught up in a machine back there.
They get bogged down in the system. Yeah, I think you're right.
They get bogged down in the system and they have to do trade-offs and compromises that they never thought that they would or thought that they would have to. And then something like this comes along, what we're talking about, whether it's outdoor recreation or, trails. These are things that they can say, hey, I fought for that. I helped make it happen. I can feel good about that,
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's good advice. Yeah. Let's shift gears a little bit. You do a lot of work with inner city youth outdoors. What programs are you involved in there?
So one of the things that I have recognized, I've been very involved with a civic organization called the Rotary. And, Rotary has 35,000 clubs around the world, and they are usually made up of civic-minded business people who have a certain capacity to give back and a desire to give back. They have an altruistic nature about them. Mm-hmm. And so I am a member of a downtown Denver club, and my passion really was about how do we get these inner city youth who never get outside. We say don't get west of Federal, right? They don't get out of that urban environment, and it's so distressing. And so our Rotary Club basically has a youth version of our club in high school, in inner city high school, that is made up. I don't think there's one Anglo kid in the class.
Wow.
And so they do all kinds of things like, feeding the homeless and doing a variety of things to help in the local community. And I went to one of their meetings and said, how do you guys feel about doing stuff outdoors? What do you do and what would you like to do? And bottom line was they weren't doing much and they'd like to do everything. So through Choose Outdoors, I began to help fund the opportunities for them to go canoeing and kayaking and mountain biking and rock climbing. And what I realized is that through scouting, they have a sort of similar high school aged effort called Venture Crews. And Venture Crews are co-ed. They don't wear the uniforms. They don't do the, on my honor, I'll do my best. So what I did was I merged my Interact, which is the high school Rotary Club, with the Venture Crew. Huh. And what that did was that enabled me to utilize all of their facilities, and we've stayed at some awesome campgrounds because of that. They have a climbing wall, so maybe a lot of the listeners will know Brian Kelligan. Brian's been in the outdoor industry forever. He has Bison Designs, and Brian is a hardcore Eagle Scout, and he heard what I was doing. He's now on my board of directors and has become very passionate about helping me get these inner city youth outdoors. So we're not taking large numbers out right now, but my goal was to create this model.
Yeah, that's
that
great.
Any one of these Rotary clubs could pick up, and, with a couple of phone calls and a couple of links, tap into these resources to get the kids outdoors. In Denver, we have, a group called City Wild. So City Wild is all about taking inner city kids rafting. So we connect with them.
Cool.
We have Trips for Kids, which is mountain biking. And, you pay them a couple of $100. They show up with 20 bikes and they take everybody out for, a day. So I found these existing groups. I'm not trying to replicate or, I have no desire to create that kind of infrastructure.
Right.
What I am trying to do is tie existing organizations that have a similar passion for expanding their bases into these other demographics for obvious reasons, right?
That's great,
the outdoor industry recognizes not only is it the right thing to do, but this is where, their future customers are going to come from, a more diverse country. So to the degree that they can get involved.
And have any other Rotary clubs picked it up?
I've been doing it with 2 Rotary clubs, and I've been giving presentations around the state. And what's happening as a result of that is I do the presentation, and then some of those other Rotary clubs have helped to fund my effort. They've just written checks to our club, and they've asked me to come and speak to theirs. So what ultimately has to happen is those Rotary clubs will have like any organization, a spectrum of interests, a spectrum of pet projects.
You got to find somebody that loves the outdoors,
Exactly. And that is willing to, be the champion,
right? Because
there's a lot of funding available. There's scholarships available. There's, my Rotary Club will, provide transportation for these kids. We're going to do a winter weekend because I've got 2 Rotary Club members who own cabins in the mountains. And they're
great.
Like, well, let's bring them up there. Because I can't get into, try to get into the 10th Mountain Division or any of those. You can never book those places. This is sort of a way of accessing, like I said, very sort of philanthropic-minded organization with a lot of great people in it who want to share their passion.
Yeah, and broadening the reach. Yeah, that's great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And what outdoor activities do you participate in? Sounds like you must do a lot of everything, huh?
I do. And I would be the first to admit I am somewhat in awe when I walk around the Outdoor Retailer Show about the accomplishments and the types of things that everybody does there. And I've found that a lot of people there are interested in figuring out how do they take that celebrity and turn it into something positive. I think Big City Mountaineers is a good example of that. There's a lot of great outdoor industry icons who help, support an organization like that. And that's a great example. But at the end of the day, I have a lot of friends that are, celebrities in the industry. But, God bless his soul. I was very good friends with Royal Robbins, who's actually one of my chairs. But I'm not a hardcore rock climber, I think we climbed the 3rd flat-iron in Boulder, and that was about as tough as it gets for me.
Well, that's the beauty of the industry, though. We can all hobnob with these guys that have done some phenomenal things, and even go out on adventures with them, but not have to be at their level. That's the great thing about the business, I think. One of the great things.
It is, and I feel very fortunate to have become a part of that tribe, though I'm not, sort of about to climb Everest. I certainly know a lot of those people and appreciate what they're doing, along those lines.
Yeah. And what are some of your favorite books, or do you give books as gifts very often? I one year my wife got me a great present, and what she did was she looked up some of the best adventure travel books ever written. Great, yeah.
So I have everything, from Rick Ridgway to a book about Sir Edmund Hillary to a book about my life as an explorer by Sven Hedren, West with the Night. And then, there are some others that are more sort of directly related to the work that I'm doing around our forest. So Chuck Lavelle, who I mentioned, has written a book called Forever Green, The History and Hope of the American Forest. There's another book that I have, highly recommend called American Canopy about Eric Rutkow, who's kind of like the history of forests in this country, including urban forests.
Oh, cool. That'd be great.
What's happened there. And then there are, Norman MacLean's Young Men in Fire.
It's a great book.
Another great book.
Yep.
And then another, catalytic book for me was Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv.
Mm-hmm.
Doug Brinkley's Wilderness Warrior. So, I mean, I've got a pretty eclectic.
Extensive library there. That's great.
I do. And, I feel like these are the things that resonate to my core. And that's kind of how I focus my interest when it comes to literature.
Yeah. And you're outdoors a lot. Do you have a favorite piece of outdoor gear under $100?
I got a Christmas present this year from it's actually my daughter's boyfriend, the Hydro Flask.
Oh, yeah.
And,
great.
It seems to have many, many uses above and beyond the outdoors. But, something like that, I think, is one of those things that kind of take pride in it getting beaten up and, putting a few stickers on it. And, it's a great present, but it was also, it has a great deal of utility for everyone.
Yeah, that's a great tool.
The outdoors.
Yeah. As we go to wrap here, is there anything else you'd like to ask or say to our audience?
I think all of us who've been in the outdoor industry for so long have recognized that we're faced with a lot of challenges. There's a lot of threats to recreation in our public lands. And I think that whatever each of us can do, however small or big that may be, is what we have to, take on as a charge for leaving our legacy, much the way we were fortunate in the legacy that was left to us. Because I think we all realize there's too much at stake right now to lay back.
Yeah.
So we all have different ways of achieving that, all have different roles to play in making that happen. But whatever that is, whatever speaks to your soul, get out there and do it.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah. And how can people find you if they want to reach out and get a hold of you? Is it email or LinkedIn or what's the best?
Yeah, my email is bruceward1, bruceward, the number 1 at gmail.com. The websites that we have are, there's the capitalchristmastreet.com. If you want to follow along with that, which we've been getting a lot of great visibility and see what's going on there. ChooseOutdoors.com is the, overarching one. And then there's America's Forest with Chuck Lavelle is a third website that we have that, all are integrated into these efforts to connect all Americans to our public lands through recreation.
Great. Excellent. Well, we'll link to all that in the show notes and put all the social links on there. Well, Bruce, it's been great chatting with you. Thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, Rick, and thank you for what you do. I think it's an important role that you're playing right now, and I think that it's something that really needs to gain much greater visibility, recognition, and we'll all be passing them all on.
Thank you.
I think for years to come.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a fun project. I look forward to more interviews, and I look forward to seeing you in Denver in a couple of days.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right,
thank you for the interview.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Yeah.
Bye. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Bruce Ward. You can catch up with him on email at bruceward1@gmail.com. And the websites for the groups he works with are capitalchristmastree.org, chooseoutdoors.org, and America's Forest with chucklavelle.org. Lavelle is spelled Leavell. You'll find links to everything we discussed in the show notes at theoutdoorbizpodcast.com/episodes/076. This episode received support from Scott Osherman and the Cairn Company. I had Scott on the show back in October. You can listen on episode 044. Thank you, Scott, and thanks for listening. Today's podcast is brought to you by WordPress. I've used WordPress to build a number of websites, including Stillwater's Consulting and the Outdoor Biz Podcast. There are a number of themes and plugins available both free and for purchase, enabling you to easily create the custom look and feel you want. If you're starting an online business, publishing a blog, and looking to take your online presence to the next level, visit theoutdoorbizpodcast.com/WordPress and get going today. With simple installation tools and thousands of themes to choose from, you'll be up and running in no time. Go to theoutdoorbizpodcast.com/WordPress and get your site launched today. If you want more of the Outdoor Biz Podcast, you can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. Be sure and go to theoutdoorbizpodcast.com where you'll find all the episodes, show notes, and much, much more. Thanks for listening, and until next time, be sure to make time to get outside.